Hey, Richard here, Facts for Working People. I wanted to make a few comments about the Facebook banning of, it says in the Wall Street Journal here, this was from yesterday, dangerous individuals and organisations they've banned from their platform. I'm opposed to that. I think socialists and activists should oppose this 31-year-old kid, really, who's never done much in his life and been given everything, from determining who can speak or write on a platform as vast as Facebook, where the working class is pretty much banned from the mass media. And one of the reasons they want to the voice of the working class, and one of the reasons they want to control the internet is it gives us great access. The social networks, the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of these, they have such a they've played such an important role in organising and mobilising people. And as far as banning anybody that's dangerous individuals and organisations, I mean, you've got Trump on there. But so he names a couple. This guy, he's got that website. Alex Jones, and this Jewish activist who, and some other conspiracy people, and also Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan, the Nation of Islam leader. And I wanted to say a couple of things about that, because to compare, could you imagine with what Trump says, if I'm not an Obama supporter by any means, but could you imagine had Obama made statements about race and supported Farrakhan in the way that, and openly championed Farrakhan in the way that Trump does fascists and white nationalists? Could you imagine if Obama do that? It would be just unbelievable. And the thing with Farrakhan is, if you take Farrakhan and Jones, they are very similar in a sense. They both support capitalism. For Farrakhan, it's black capitalism. They are both very wealthy people. If you take black nationalism, Farrakhan's view that black capitalism is the way to emancipation for black people. Of course, he's talking about black capitalists, and Malcolm X totally opposed that view that capitalism and racism is endemic to capitalism, and you cannot eliminate racism without capitalism. But if you take Farrakhan, he's like in many ways the Zionists. I'm sure for all his assault on the Jewish capitalists, he doesn't say much about the religion of the ones that actually run this country, which is Christian capitalists. Now, not that a person's religion matters. The fact that they're capitalist is the most important issue. But identity is very strong here. And if you take somebody like Farrakhan and the Zionists, they're similar in the sense that Farrakhan, his existence is based on separating the working class on a religious ideology and a racial ideology, and the same as Zionism. Zionism thrives on anti-Semitism, because without it, they have no argument. So that's why the unification or the unity of the working class is so abhorrent to both those groups. So there is a similarity with Jones and Farrakhan, and that they are pro-capitalist. But the thing is that Farrakhan, when you include Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam under dangerous individuals and organisation, there's just no comparison between him and Jones. Firstly, all of the other ones they mentioned are all white, and in this country, that's part of the whole divide and rule strategy. So you're talking about one man, Farrakhan and his small organisation, against a whole swath of white nationalist, fascist organisations with a fascist-leaning president of the country. So you can't compare the two. Secondly, the black Muslims of the Nation of Islam, to my knowledge, has no history of dragging white people out of their beds and lynching them. Has no record of killing white people. If you remember the Million Man March, he got up there, and one of the issues for the Million Man March was atonement. What do black people have to atone for? But this is the view of the capitalist class toward any of its workers, to any workers. What he wants is the right to exploit in a way, as much of a way as the white ones do. So the blacks have nothing to atone for. And also the difference between him and Malcolm X, who would have been pointing at the White House as the source of the problem, not Farrakhan at all. So he's not dangerous he lives in a very wealthy area, he's got guards outside his house, he's not a dangerous person. Yes, and why does he attack the Jewish capitalists to the extent that he does? He doesn't attack the white ones, the European Christian ones who are in control of the country. And also, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, Malcolm X met with the Klan on behalf of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam back in the 60s. And he was just completely sickened by it. And he began to question how come that the Nation of Islam never attacked the Klan. He talks toward the end of his life here, in his last speeches I have here. He talks about how the Nation of Islam, they were violent. They've been violent from coast to coast. Muslims in the Muslim movement have been involved in cold, calculated violence. This is Malcolm X speaking. And not at one time have they been involved in any violence against the Ku Klux Klan. They're capable, they're qualified, they're equipped, they know how to do it, but they'll never do it, only to one another. Now, I am well aware of what I'm setting in motion, but what I'm saying up here tonight, I'm well aware of. But I have never said or done anything in my life that I wasn't prepared to suffer the consequences for. And he actually did suffer the consequences of that, because Farrakhan, I believe, got his mosque, and Farrakhan wanted him out of the way as well. Malcolm X was moving toward a socialist position, toward unity with Martin Luther King, who the Nation of Islam savaged, and that was a threat to them. So firstly, we should all oppose the banning of this young kid that he's 30-something now, has had all the advantages in life and is a billionaire. We should we should oppose these bans. Secondly, what we should raise also is that these platforms should be nationalised. They're just like the mass media. The mass media is owned by capitalists, by wealthy capitalists. They control my local news is just absolutely worthless. Look at the whole reporting on Venezuela, on the world, on everything. What we should call for is the nationalisation and the public ownership and the content of these platforms to be controlled by working class people. And I mean, if you look at the trade union movement, for example, we've said for years, they should have their own channels, they should have their own papers. If you ever read a trade union paper, in the main, they're just absolutely boring. The bureaucracy's paper, they're absolutely boring, because more than anything, they do not want to mobilise the potential power of their own members and the effect that will have on the rest of the working class. That's why they suppress militant movements from below. And just lastly, I want to relate. I find it hard to accept in relation to Farrakhan and Malcolm X that he didn't have something to do with that assassination and the murder of Malcolm X, because I can't believe those black Muslims would have killed Malcolm X without his authority. And it's interesting that I don't know if you know, I read one book by Claiborne Carson, who's a professor of history at Stanford. He writes, I think Malcolm himself knew that his former colleagues wanted to see him dead. The question is not whether they wanted to see him dead, but whether they actually ordered the assassination. Within the context of the Nation of Islam, there was no need to do it. If you label somebody as an enemy of your religion, then the strongest believers are going to believe that it is an invitation to take matters in their own hands. It didn't have to come down as an order. Farrakhan would not have had to order the assassination. All he had to do was identify Malcolm X as a traitor. And one of the reasons I'm sort of focusing on Farrakhan is they include Farrakhan because they like to use him to scare us, to scare white people, as if they are going to, the Nation of Islam and him are any threat whatsoever compared to Jones and all the white fascist, racist, white nationalist type groupings here. And the whites by far outweigh them in population. So they raise him to scare us. But you know what? I worked in some rough neighborhoods, economically depressed areas, mostly black areas. I've worked in the streets, and I always used to say, you know, if there were riots, and sometimes I worried about that where I lived, not in my local community, but when a cop shot a black kid or something like that, you know, people can go off. And I always used to say that you know, if that happened to me, I was out there and I saw a Nation of Islam mosque, I'd head for that mosque, because you'd be safe there, no matter what you think of them. They have no history of that sort of violence against white people, and you'd be safe there. But so there's no need to be frightened of them, and we should be very aware, white workers should, of why they use that fear to Farrakhan. He's a consummate bourgeois. He's a very wealthy man. He's for black capitalism. He's no threat to any of us whatsoever. And to quote Carson again, he says, this is the Claiborne Carson, he's professor of history at Stanford. He wrapped up Farrakhan in a nutshell. He says, when you strip away anti-white invective, what you really have from Farrakhan today is just an updating of Booker T. Washington. There is nothing that would not fit in with the Republican Party platform. It's pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He's considered a militant because he says things that become controversial, but his program is anything but radical. So we should strongly oppose the banning of the of these platforms. I mean, it's really who this guy is deciding. It's such a vast network of information, and he's deciding it. Basically, a corporation is telling us what we can read and what we can't read. We need to strongly oppose that. Now, one of the liberals in this article, it's Christina Lopez, Director for Extremism at Liberal Advocacy Groups, Media Matters. She's at Media Matters. That may do some good work. But she says today's announcement opens the doors to making Facebook's platform safer and inspiring some optimism that the tech company might be capable of taking responsibility for the ways its platforms have empowered extremists, she says. That's not a good thing, because you know what? I have a blog, me and a few others have a blog, we'll be extremists. It's the same with the T word, the terrorist word. When I was growing up in England, see the film In the Name of the Father, the Irish family that were in prison for 16-something years. When they make laws like that, when they make restrictions on free speech like this, then it includes all of us that are a threat to them. Believe me, a strike is terrorism from a capitalist point of view. So those are just a couple of things I wanted to say about that. And that's it for me. Richard Mellor, Facts for Working People. And as I always say, we do have phone conference calls on Saturdays. If you would like to join us, if you go to the blog, weknowwhatsup.blogspot.com, no apostrophe. You'll see an email on the right, and you can contact us there. And if you'd like to visit us on our conference calls and add to them, or just come in and visit, that'd be fine too. We can talk about that. All right. Richard Mellor, Facts for Working People.